guys, it's Mizzy, and I'm a mixed girl in a mixed up world. Welcome to the live show. I want to thank everybody who's here. Let me make sure I click into the comments so I can see what you guys have to say. We have a special guest tonight I'm going to get to in a minute. Before I do, I want to thank everybody who came out for our standout at Michael Morrissey's office on Thursday. We had such an amazing crowd there, and it was awesome. And I love you all. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you for everybody popping in. I don't want to wait too long because I want to get right to my guest. Peter's a dear friend. He's been such a wealth of knowledge and a valuable person in the Free Karen Reed movement and also the Justice for Sandra Birchmore movement. He's helped me with stuff, and I know he's helped a lot of other people when it comes to policing, and if they needed to reach out to law enforcement, he's helped a lot of people. So even just that, him helping people that way, he's been such a wealth of knowledge and such a dear friend to so many of us. I'm not going to wait any longer to bring him in. Retired Canton PD Sergeant Peter Murphy.
Hello, Mizzy.
Hello, sir. How are you?
Great to see you. I'm wonderful. Thank you. How about yourself?
I'm pretty good. I'm good now that we're actually able to do this without, hopefully, us not crashing out.
Exactly.
Hey, everyone. Dennis Sweeney, Barb, Rich Schiffer. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. All right. Let's just dive right in. How did you become a police officer? Was that something you wanted to do from childhood, or is it something you found on the way, as you got older?
I believe it was an inherent desire on my part, as I recall, looking back when I was 5 or 6 years old. I used to go down to the ball field and play, ball and so forth. Police officers down in sort of a community policing concept and ball to us or pitch to us, and I just had a tremendous respect for the uniform and the badge, and these guys seemed like great guys, and then it became more of as I got older, it was more of a concept of people helping people and protect the weak from the strong, and I was off to the races, started taking exams and federal level, state level, municipal level.
So when did you finally become a police officer?
Well, it's sort of a convoluted story for most police officers. In other words, sometimes you're appointed as a special police officer in a community, and basically it gives you some arrest powers. You wear a badge, carry a gun. You have to take some, cursory law enforcement courses, criminal justice courses, and also have first responder. In case you go to a medical emergency, you can obviously render first aid. So I was sworn in as a police officer by the Canton Police back in the mid-'70s as a special, and then we had to wait for I say we collectively, there's about 10 of us. We had to wait for a civil service exam to be administered under the civil service, Massachusetts Civil Service Commission.
What's the difference between a special and a regular police officer?
A regular police, well, I was going to give you sort of a three-tier story. A special
okay,
is,
sorry.
That's all right. A special is you're appointed by the select board, but you have no civil service standing. A civil service police officer has taken an exam. You come out on a list. You get veterans preference, that type of how would I say it, additional information becomes part of your record. And then you would have additional training. And again, now you're on a list and you're waiting for openings. Now you could put down 3 towns that you'd consider taking the job in once you're on a civil service list. So you could put down Canton, Milton, Norwood, or something like that.
Yeah.
In the first town that had an opening, depending on your grade score, you'd get a call, maybe an interview, and, you'd go in, and that could be, how you got hired. So I was permanent intermittent for several years, as was about 10 of us. And then Canton, like many towns, suffered the Proposition 2.5 cutbacks, and 3 officers from Canton actually got laid off. Went to working details as their only income, and they had families and so forth. So we were basically told by the chief at the time, you guys are, you're getting, backstaged here. It's going to take a while for you to get on a police list and get hired through attrition, because we just laid off 3 officers. So when we get more money, we'll bring them back and see where we are. So that went through the late 70s, early 80s, and Westwood Police, which is an adjacent town to Canton, had an ad in the paper and said they were hiring because 2 officers transferred to the MDC. I put in a resume and an application, got hired, and that was July 1st of 82. Went to the police academy, graduated before Christmas, and I was there until December 13th of 86 and transferred back to Canton.
Oh, wow. What was your favorite part of being a police officer?
It was pretty much my interest to help people, keep, again, like I said, protect people, the weak from the strong. If you went to a scene where there was domestic violence or something like that, male versus female in some cases, or other situations, usually somebody was much more of an aggressor, break it up, stop the violence, render first aid. The same thing with a car accident. You've got victims perhaps seriously injured, perform life-saving measures, get as much help there as you can, call for a med flight helicopter, and try to save lives, Mizzy.
Yeah.
People helping people. That's what my logo was, or my genre when I'd give roll call. I'd say, remember, guys and ladies and gentlemen, as we go out here and start the patrol, we're people helping people. That's our theme for today.
That's awesome. So let's change up to, so we can really get into the meat and potatoes of like why we're here. It's so awesome to have your background and your knowledge, especially when it comes to the Canton Police Department. With you being a sergeant there, you have such a wealth of knowledge of not just being a police officer, but being in leadership. So that is such great help to, the Justice for Sandra Birchmore movement, and it was to the Free Karen Reed movement. You are somebody who's beloved throughout the Free Karen Reed movement. How did you find out about Karen's case?
Well, I probably, like most people in Massachusetts, I was watching the news one morning. I think it was probably the morning that they had found poor Officer O'Keefe's body on Fairview Road, and it was all snow covered. And the report on Channel 4 or 5, whatever station it was at the time, indicated that a Boston police officer had apparently been struck and killed by his girlfriend. Was pretty much the gist of the initial report. And so that was kind of the narrative that was being told, that a girlfriend struck her boyfriend, who happened to be a Boston police officer. He was dead, deceased, unfortunately, tragically. And I think initially thought it was an accident.
Yeah.
And the narrative kind of went along that route for 15 months until that was obviously January 29th of 22, Mizzy. And then in April 23, things started to really percolate, which included, a very well-known content writer and journalist, Turtle Boy, aka Aiden Kearney. And I actually spoke to a police officer across the street from me, who was a Boston police officer at the time. And I asked him, I said, hey, what are you hearing at the water bubble, Boston police? I mean, there must be a lot of conversation. One of your guys, dead on a lawn of another Boston police officer. What are you hearing? He said, I'm hearing crickets. He said, nobody's talking about anything. It's mum's the word. And I said, well, that seems a little odd. And he said, and he just said to me, he said, look at Peter, if you want to really get brought up to speed on this quickly, now bear in mind that I'm talking about April of 23, which was roughly 15 months later. He said, you want to go to Turtle Boy? Look at Turtle Boy. And I said, Turtle Boy? I said, I kind of kidded him. I said, I stopped looking at cartoons when I was 10 years old. And he said, no. He said, Turtle Boy. He's a journalist and content writer, and he's done a huge deep dive on this case, and you'll get an immense amount of information quickly by looking into it. And it just took off from there, Mizzy. And then there were autopsy reports and apparent lacerations, obviously, of his right arm, of John's right arm, Officer O'Keefe's right arm, and it just hit me right, dead in the forehead. I said, there's no way a motor vehicle caused any of these injuries, and it's totally inconsistent with the injuries that he does or doesn't have. And that took me off in the direction, and I started going to standouts at the court and in May, and it was up and away.
Yeah, I had already, when Turtle Boy started writing about Karen's case, I like you heard the news. I saw it on the news that it was the way it was being portrayed, a tragic accident. And I was like, oh, that's horrible. I felt so bad for her, but it was an accident. So what can we do? And then, like you, I had heard that Turtle Boy was doing writing about her, but I had already about a month. Wait, he started in April, I believe. So 2 months before he started reporting on Karen is when we started our Facebook group and started going through stuff. So we were starting to ramp up as Karen's team was starting to ramp up, and I always felt like Sandra's case was Karen's little sister, and we were like, kind of in lockstep with them. And that led us through the whole year of 2023. And I started like ramping up my, hey guys, there's another case, and it's the same officers. You'll recognize them. And luckily, FKR was receptive to it, and it wasn't like some of the other cases people were trying to throw in, be like, to say, hey, look at my case, look at my case. They're two people who were high-profile cases, and both cases involved, police officers doing something wrong. And so I was able to, Barb and I were able to, get people to start looking at Sandra's case. And that got us through 2023. And then we had done one standout in 2023 at Morrissey's office. And there were two other standouts that through our group, but I wasn't able to attend because I was sick for both of them. Am I cutting in and out? Can you guys all hear me? Can I get some thumbs up if you guys are hearing me okay? I feel like I'm hearing a squeak.
You're okay on my end.
Okay. What about the chat? Is everything okay? Okay. So that leads us to February of 2024. I believe it was the 3rd is when you and I first met at a standout at Canton PD.
Okay.
Is that how you first heard of Sandra's case?
I believe I had probably, heard about it just again through the media prior to that. But I hadn't done any kind of a deep dive or gotten involved in it. I just figured, it was an ongoing investigation, and that more would come out to follow. And then, as you indicated a few minutes ago, when it became apparent that a lot of the same district attorneys, investigators, investigative unit out of Morrissey's office and so forth were involved in it. And at this point, I was doubting the narrative that had been spoon-fed to us about the FKR case. I said, whoa, 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 you know, this deserves a lot of attention immediately because, you know, if the FKR case was so blatantly bungled and either uninvestigated or poorly investigated or misinvestigated, then what do we got here? You know, what's going on here? And yeah, I was starting to think very poorly about, you know, the uniform people being involved in both cases. And the story, you know, needed to be investigated by another agency other than the locals and the state police. And lo and behold, the feds were already on it, apparently.
Yeah, I'm so thankful that the feds, you know, took on Sandra's case because
Exactly.
otherwise that monster would still be on the streets right now.
Yep. Yeah, he would be. And look at, I mean, just, I don't mean to be inserting my comment here if you've got a sequence of timeline, but I mean, here we are, February of 21, and here we are, you know, in 25, and you've got a district attorney, despite the arrest of a police officer in Stoughton for murder, you've got a district attorney that's still calling it a suicide.
Yeah.
What am I missing here, Mizzy? If it's glaringly apparent, tell me I'm missing it.
I have the same questions. It's ludicrous for him to still be saying that, and he should be asking the questions we are. Why the medical examiner found that in the first place? He should be pushing for them to do an autopsy review. There are things that he can do as the DA to, you know, use his power for good instead of, you know, evil.
Right.
I don't understand what I mean, I kind of do. It's the corruption, you know. It's just the fact that Sandra almost didn't get justice, and she still has a long way to go. I mean, we still have, it's not just Matthew Farwell we need off the streets, we need the rest of the guys off the streets. But it's you know, John hasn't gotten justice, and you know, Karen is a whole separate issue. The corruption side of it, but these two victims, you know, they absolutely deserve justice. And then you move on to like just en route, and there are other cases, and the other cases that are in the press right now, you know, where they're not giving discovery, and that's a tenet of our justice system for people to be getting discovery when they have their cases. And it's absolutely unacceptable for Morrissey's, the way he runs his office. So when you and I first met, you and I had a conversation. Actually, I'll circle back to that. Let me circle back to that, since we can go through what happened that day. As you know, I sent you all the reports to look at. What's one of the glaring things that you stood out to you in the Canton PD reports?
The Canton PD reports on Sandra's case, obviously, you're speaking to now.
Yep.
Well, there was, at the outset, there was a request for a well-being check. Now, I might sound extremely critical, and I guess if people want to consider me being extremely critical for people in uniform, a job I did for over 30 years, I'll take that criticism. But a well-being check usually means somebody might not be well. It's kind of a oxymoron, or it's clear. And you look at the response time from the time they got the call to get there, there was well over an hour before anybody gained entry into that unit. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Mizzy, that the initial responding officers were SRO offices, because
Yes.
that's how the communication went through. And it doesn't even appear initially that the communication went through dispatch. It seems like it went through cell phone of SRO to SRO, and it
Yes.
was almost like secret squirrel work until it became absolutely mandatory that it go out through dispatch. Um, I don't know. It just seemed like, I mean, let's face it, you don't know what's going on if you're doing a well-being check. You don't know if somebody had been hurt, fell, couldn't get up. Help me, I've fallen, I can't get up. You don't know if it's a homicide. You don't know if somebody's seriously wounded, from some sort of an assault and battery. Timing is of the essence, and it just seemed like, I thought there was sort of a long delay to get a well-being check in there right away. I mean, once they saw the car in the parking lot, it became pretty apparent, I think, that there was an urgency to get going.
Yeah. Would an SRO officer know how to handle a crime scene?
In most cases, they would be familiar with it. We all, as police officers, went through police academies of varying degrees,
Okay.
and you would have been versed in crime scene search and criminal law and types of things like that. So they should have come out of the academy with a basis of knowledge as to what to do. Now, for them to be an SRO officer, most times to be an SRO, school resource officer, you have already done your time or done some time on the street as a police officer. And then through your performance and perhaps an evaluation process, you would be deemed a good candidate to go into the schools. But you would still be taking street knowledge with you. So I wouldn't necessarily frown upon the fact that SRO officers were first on scene or were there primarily in significant numbers as opposed to uniformed officers. But again, timing and maybe again, a stepped up response by other officers to get there and find out what's going on and help the other officers. Obviously, usually you don't throw 5 people into a small apartment to do a well-being check, because I've been on well-being checks when you do find a decedent inside and you don't want 5 people traipsing around. So you try to mediate some sense of balance as well as protection for the officers that are going in.
Yeah. I do remember when Melanie Little covered some of the reports, she did say that out of all the reports, Ensley Cotard, he was one of the SRO officers. I believe he's the one who got the contact first from Sharon, the Sharon SRO officer. She thought his reports were the best reports. They were the most descriptive. They were the longest reports. So she gave him a compliment on that. What's something else that you noticed about the reports? Well, actually, before we get to so Cotard got the phone call to that Sandra hadn't been to work in a few days. Nope, they weren't able to make contact with her, and so they needed a well-being check. He called Lank and let him know, and then him and Brady were sent to Sandra's apartment, and then Yeaton was also dispatched to the apartment. They went and knocked on the door and obviously didn't get a response, so they called Sergeant Lank and they let him know let him know, and then they went out. He told them to go check her car.
Correct.
And then when they checked her car, and first of all, should they have had to be told by Lank if she's not answering her door, there's no contact, no call-ins, nobody can reach her? Should they have just took it upon themselves to knock on the door and then just go right out and check the car? Or is that something you would have thought they should have checked in with him?
It would have been, in my opinion, it all would have been part of a thought process that not only the supervisory officers or detective sergeants would have been, thinking through, but also, again, the officers on scene. And I'm not going to second guess what their thought process was, at the time, when there was snow on the ground, blah, 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 there were cars, maybe her car was totally covered, maybe her number plate wasn't, revealed immediately because of snow. So, I'm gonna sort of be a little neutral on any criticism there as far as what their thought process should have been. But yeah, that should have been a question. What does she drive for a car? Do we know? Because you can query somebody's name and date of birth in a computer with the registry, John Doe, Jane Doe, and it'll come up vehicles that are registered to them, or vehicles that have been registered to them in the past. So it is something that can be readily obtained through the dispatch.
Okay. I just look at it like from a layman's perspective, it's just that it's time being wasted to me, having to stop and call Lank when it's something they could have just went out to Yeaton's car and, like you said, punched it in, found her car, and then called Lank saying, car's covered, she's not answering the door. What do you want us to do? So they get the key from the office and they go up and I think they knock again. Obviously didn't get an answer, so they went in and they looked around her apartment, and they all kind of described it as being messy, not taken care of. That's something, a pet peeve of mine. And I've seen it in a lot of police reports where they say, oh, somebody's place is unkempt, and then you look and it's like, oh, it's just a little messy. I know it's just me harping on something, but as a police officer, when you walk into a room, how do you kind of distinguish what's messy and what is part of an active crime scene, or if it's just, okay, that person just doesn't take care of their apartment? I know it's something hard. It's hard to sometimes distinguish, but as a police officer, how do you try to break that down?
Well, that's a good question. And again, a lot of it is, frame of reference of what a police officer has seen in training and experience in the past. Perhaps with their own, their own modus operandi of operating in their own houses. I mean, a messy, unkept house to one officer might be acceptable or, tolerable, tolerated by another. So, you'd look for maybe chairs that were knocked over. You'd look for some visible signs of struggle, things that appeared to be out of place, maybe cooking utensils on the ground, that type of stuff. Does clutter or cat fur, accumulated cat fur, or the fact that the rugs didn't appear to be vacuumed, or whatever the case was, is that necessarily an inherent concern? I mean, you take it all in the totality of circumstances, Mizzy, in my opinion.
Yeah. So then they go in, they look in the living room, the kitchen's, you walk into the kitchen when you're coming in, they check the living room, and then they check the bathroom, and they notice that the bathroom was very neat. And then they go to her bedroom, and unfortunately, when Cotard opened the door, he found Sandra deceased. They closed I think they kind of checked her out to make sure she was deceased. And then they, left, backed out and said, this is, a what is it called? An unattended death. So they backed out and called Lank. It was Cotard and Yeaton who found her. And it's weird. I don't have a report from Brady. Is that normal? Like, should every officer who reports to a scene fill out a report?
It depends on the protocol of the department. In looking at the police report, by the initial officers responding on scene on February 4th, 2021. Yes, you're right. Cotard and Yaton were there. Brady was there, but I did never see a report from Brady. I would have thought, since everybody else chimed in, that Brady would have chimed in, or maybe the supervisor would have said, we need a report from you as to what you did or what you saw. I also would just comment in the report from that police department. There's a lot of response and calls and arrivals, and there doesn't seem to be a plethora of times, timestamps.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I was called and I, Detective Sergeant Jones arrived at, 10:43 hours. We, went into the apartment at approximately 10:46 hours. There should have been somebody taking with a notebook sort of chronological timelines of what was going on, who was on scene, who was doing what, that type of stuff. Perhaps pictures taken of the car, footprints around the car. You know what I mean? The investigation could have been kind of unfolding at that time. So to answer your question simply, I wouldn't be surprised that Brady would have been asked to do a report. I don't know the reason why he didn't. Maybe it was just maybe a one-liner could have said, Officer Brady has nothing to add to, any of the information that we garnished at the scene by other officers. Period. He was there, but he didn't see anything. He didn't do anything. I don't know. We don't know. It's a good question.
As far as we know from what is there with the other reports, he didn't go into Sandra's apartment, and that's all we kind of know. He arrived with, I assume with Cotard. We don't know. There's no report saying. They just said that they were there, and then is it pronounced Yaton, not Yeaton?
He liked to pronounce it Yaton, yes, okay. Chip Yaton, but it does say in paragraph number 2 of Sergeant Lang's report at the time, paragraph 2 indicates Officer Cotard, Officer Brady, and Officer Yaton responded to 3307 to make contact with Birchmore. So they obviously all went, but we didn't hear anything more from Brady.
Yeah, I just found that was one of the things that stuck out to me big time.
Mm-hmm.
And so they leave the apartment, they secure it, and McCourt, I believe, arrives. Detective Jonathan McCourt arrives, I believe, first, and then Sergeant Lank also comes, and I believe they go into the apartment, and they look at the scene, and this is one of the things I also find weird. You and I were talking about it before. The 4 officers that did do reports, they all said that Sandra hung herself with something different.
Mm-hmm.
And the one I find the weird, because Officer Yaton said the ligature was a scarf. Officer Cotard said it was a string, rope, belt, or strap, I believe. And Jonathan McCourt said it was a strap, a black strap, which is what it ended up being. But the one I found the oddest, if those weren't already odd, it was Sergeant Lanks. He didn't describe what he saw. He described what Cotard saw, and he described it incorrectly from what Cotard said. And first of all, shouldn't he have said what he saw? I mean, it's one thing to say, this is what Cotard told me, and then when I got there, I observed it was this. that's one thing, but he didn't even say what he saw. To me, that makes no sense. Why would he describe? Does that make sense to you?
I understand what you're saying. I know where you're coming from 100% on that, Mizzy. I think it could have, I think, obviously, I believe Mike Lank was a sergeant at the time, right? I don't believe he was a
Yes.
lieutenant on that date. I believe he was a detective sergeant. It wouldn't have been out of the, I don't think, ordinary for him to have done a narrative paragraph himself and say, you know, upon arriving on scene, I was the commanding officer and I directed the subordinates to do this, maintain, a crime scene, don't let anyone else in. They called in firefighter Whitley, and to their credit, it appears they don't, had him put on Tyvek boots, and he made a pronouncement. So that was a positive thing for them to do on that part. But yeah, again, I know what you're looking for. You're looking for some sort of timestamps and narratives about who, who, what, when, where, why type of answers to stuff. And again, I hear what you're saying. I'm picking up what you're putting down.
Yeah. I just want to read what Yeaton. Let me see. I'm trying to find exactly what he said because I know Lank said it was a strap. I opened the door. Miss Birchmore seated on the floor with some sort of belt, lanyard, string, or rope. So he didn't even say strap. And yes, a belt can look like a strap. I know that's me nitpicking, but it's weird that he would just because Lank specifically says a black strap, and that's not even what Cotard said it was. So it's like you have 4 officers and they're not even fully agreeing on what the ligature was. That's one of the things when I looked at these reports, I was like, there's something really, really, really wrong with this case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know what you're saying, and I read the same 4 descriptions that you just referenced, Mizzy, and I guess is it we brought it up earlier. There seemed to be a big discrepancy in the description in paragraph number 5, where the video was obtained by Carlos Verizimo, I guess, and indicated Sandra's entrance and exits into the building and so forth, and times and dates. And it seems like the dates are inconsistent with the actual day of the week. I don't like, there was I don't know.
I believe
haphazard report writing, but it just seems like there was some inaccuracies.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing is you want to, you're dealing with a young woman who was found dead and it's unattended and it's made to look like she did it to herself. And, these reports, it's somebody's life. These reports should be accurate. And it's one thing to, I don't know, a little things, but to me, it was a lot of things that were out of place. And we were talking about it earlier, like in the reports, Lank had different dates for different things, and a lot of his dates are off. And it's just, as a sergeant, you're supposed to be looking at the people under you. If you can't write the reports properly, how do you expect, the officers under you to write the reports correct? If you came across, a report that you knew one of your officers got a detail wrong or something, how would you handle that as the sergeant on duty?
Well, supervisors are required, it's part of their official duties to review police reports by subordinates and review evidence tags to make sure they're bagged and tagged and logged in correctly. So to answer your question simply is it's a supervisor's responsibility, going up the ladder. So a sergeant detective would have or should have or could have reviewed all the reports of the patrolman that went to the scene. And then perhaps a lieutenant would have reviewed those. And, again, at some point, I always said it wasn't the lions and tigers you had to be afraid of in the jungle. It's the small flies and the mosquitoes. It's details. It's, so what might seem insignificant at the time.
Yeah.
Look at how critical the timing was in the FKR of when people left 34 Fairview and when they arrived at the station. And
exactly. That got down to seconds and minutes,
It did.
And
I will say this, Mizzy, that I don't have receipts for it other than people told me soon after the Birchmore case became apparently a big issue, that there were several officers who were either at the scene or learned about the scene and were not in agreement at all when the autopsy report came out by the ME that it was a suicide. They basically saw it differently. However, I still can't figure out how two police departments, Canton and the state police, apparently they missed her broken necklace, which was on the ground and had hair in it, I guess, and that stayed there. I believe the necklace was actually found at a later date by family.
yes,
The
yes.
whole crime scene should have been photographed, and that
It's
necklace,
actually in the photographs. It's in the crime scene photographs. It's in the FBI affidavit says that the necklace is in the crime scene photographs.
right? But didn't the family actually find it on the floor?
Yes.
Didn't I read it that way? So how do you leave a critical piece of evidence? I mean, that could have had, let's say, DNA or hair fibers from the assailant, if there was an assailant at the time or suspected. Yet it wasn't bagged and tagged, and I believe the family actually brought that as an issue. Am I right?
Yeah, the family is the one who collected that.
Yeah.
Also, that's actually where I was going to go next. When you read the affidavit from the FBI, you start to understand, Sandra's injuries and some of the things that they should have seen on scene. Dr. Smock, I believe that's his name.
Yes.
He's the one who did the autopsy review for the FBI, and he said that there were signs of a struggle. The necklace was a clear sign of a struggle. And also she had abrasions on the tip of her nose. And there was a indentation of the buckle that was on the strap on her upper chest, but the buckle was actually by her ear. And there was no way for Sandra to do that herself because she was in, from what CPD and MSP were saying, she did it. So the buckle couldn't move like that. It was, where it rested was up by her, I believe, her right ear. And the impression was supposedly visible. And so was the abrasions on her nose were visible. So Canton PD should have caught it, but MSP should have also caught these. Cotard and Yaton might not have caught those because they might not have seen a lot of crime scenes like that, like finding a body. But Detective McCourt and you would think Lank would have at least seen, especially Lank, would have seen a few bodies. I know there's not a ton of murders but they've seen bodies before, as police officers, and as long as Lank has been a police officer. So, and then for MSP to come in and also back them up and say there is no struggle.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't understand.
Well, yeah, no, I heard what you're saying, and obviously, videos later obtained, filled in a few of the voids of timelines. Obviously, the last person to see her was the gentleman described with a hoodie on and a black mask, in dark work boots, I think, tall in stature, came in with full apparel on and gear and hoodie and left whatever it was 27 minutes later, according to the timestamp, even though there was a 13-second variable, I guess, in the timestamp, but
13 minute.
13 minute, yeah, not seconds, I'm sorry, yeah, so, yes, there were a couple of inconsistencies there. The stamping that we're talking about from the strap, that might have been something that, was perhaps under her blouse or under something that, outer garment that she had that would not have necessarily been seen until they got to the hospital. But, certainly I think a necklace laying on the ground should have been, attended to.
Yeah. And I personally believe the scuffs on her nose. And I spoke to Trooper Fanning, and I know we're going through Canton PD, but I mean, obviously we need to bring them into this too. When I talked to Trooper Fanning, I got him to admit that her phone stopped moving before he left.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that was a clear sign. And he said, we think she did it right away. So basically, the door slammed and she went and did it. And the FBI said, no, she didn't. It was him. And he was leaving. And okay. So
if you want me to just comment on what you said, yes. In addition to the comments you just made, I read what you're speaking to. She had gotten food delivered. DoorDash had delivered food. She'd gone out with her snow brush, I guess, to clean her car, which indicated she had plans to use her car the next day, perhaps not to kill herself. There was also indications that there was a load of laundry going. There were, I guess, recent baby gifts that had been purchased. There was a lot of circumstantial evidence that appeared to be inconsistent with somebody, contemplating suicide.
Yeah. And even to go along with what you're saying, there was, she had just ordered a car seat, just got the car seat. She had a baby carriage. She made appointments that day. She made plans. And people got to understand, she was only 10 weeks pregnant. So she was planning so much out in that short amount of time. She planned for her cats to be taken care of when she went into labor, and she made appointments to get photos taken. I don't know. I don't know if they were pregnancy photos or they were baby photos after she gave birth, but she did. Those were things she did that day, and those things don't indicate are indicative of somebody is going to kill themselves. And Sandra was so excited to be a mom, so it's tough to look at what them dropping the ball for her is such a to me it's such a disgrace. It's Sandra was groomed and assaulted at 15, and the grooming continued until she was murdered at 23. And that was by police officers. But then the police officers who come in to look into her death don't even stand up for her. They kind of treat her like trash. Also, so the police, and the thing is, she wanted to be a police officer so bad. That's one of the worst parts of it. She looked up to police officers so much. And for them to say it was a suicide, it's so heartbreaking. I have a question. So Officer Nix Sandra's aunt called the Canton PD, and Officer Nix is the one who she spoke to. And he told her in such a disgusting way to me, in uncaring, no compassion at all. Is that normal for whoever answers the phone at the front to notify, do a death notification? Is that something a detective or a sergeant should have done, or should the Massachusetts State Police done, not the officer that answers the phone at the front of the station?
I'm going to ask you to refresh my memory. Did he receive a call from a family member inquiring as to what was going on, or did he make the call?
No, her aunt called Canton PD.
Okay.
They were trying to get a wellness check also.
Right.
And she was calling to find out what was going on with her.
Was that the aunt that was in New Hampshire?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And the way he told her was so vile, and there was no compassion at all. And to me, if I know at that point, people were like, no, she didn't do it, or she did do it. And there were questions, but especially when somebody commits suicide, that's even more a delicate, situation, death notification, and the way he told her was so cold. And is that normal for, like I said, the officer at the front of the station just to tell somebody their loved one is dead and they killed themselves?
The only way I can comment on that is usually the protocol in most departments is to make a notification to next of kin, which obviously would be in this case the person in New Hampshire, family member. Usually, if possible, if it can be done reasonably with the personnel on hand, somebody could have called the police department where this family member lived and asked that police department, let's just say it was Lebanon, New Hampshire. I don't know the town busy, but in the past we did it many, many, many times. And you'd call that police department and you'd say, hi, this is, Sergeant Smith from Canton Police. We need a death notification to next of kin. Would you have an officer that could go to such and such an address, or in your listing book, could you give us an address for such and such a family member? Had that woman called, the family member called, and before that process that I just related to had been done, perhaps, if the officer might have been dealing with 911 calls, he might have been alone at the desk, he could have had, been up to his belt in alligators. I don't know what was going on. So I'll give Officer Nix the benefit of the doubt on how the message was delivered to next of kin. But as a rule, you try to get the police department where that person resides to go to the house. Sometimes you even have the police, that agency, they might say, okay, they might call a local church and say, all right, Father, Reverend, Minister, can you join us? We have to go make a next of kin notification of a passing down in Canton, Mass. So, I can't really, I guess, comment or criticize Nix either way. I mean, I know it sounds very harsh to you and probably maybe perhaps to the family, but could he have done it differently? Could it have been delivered? Could have call been made up to the police department where she resided, and had an officer go with a priest or somebody from the church? That would have been one of the options, and it's an option that I use myself and implemented many, many times, if that helps answer your question.
Yeah. I just think if he was going to tell her, he could have been, if I can find the clip of him, because it is on of him telling her, I'll send it to you.
Okay.
It's one thing for if he just ended up being the officer who gave the death notification. It's not that he did it, it's how he did it. And to me, that's no way for a loved one to find out their niece is deceased and the manner that they were claiming that she did it.
Yeah, no, I understand exactly where you're coming from, and certainly to any family member that was receiving that information, calling the police department back to say what's going on, who tried to reach out to me, and hearing it, that a loved one is deceased, and perhaps even the manner that it happened is gonna be shocking and unsettling to anybody. As far as any other options that Officer Nix or the Canton Police Department had at the time, I can't speak to the number of calls that they were dealing with, if they had something else going on. But the ideal situation certainly would have been to get a hold of the police department in the community that the family member lived in and have somebody go there, perhaps again with somebody from the clergy. And that's the way I did it, and many of us did it over the years. Again, there could have been reasons that I'm not aware of why it didn't happen that way.
You and I talked about before we went live, the treatment that the Massachusetts State Police gave to Farwell, how him and I believe his brother were both interviewed in a parking lot on different days, obviously, but Matthew was interviewed in a parking lot, and then there was another time they were getting his phones, and he was brought in, and they also asked him to take his DNA, and they refused. Is it normal to meet a police officer if you have questions for him in this type of situation in a parking lot, or should he been brought into Massachusetts State Police or even into the Canton Police Department in an interrogation room and be questioned that way?
Again, I would suggest or submit to you that the protocol and, perhaps integrating procedures of that police department to with the state police probably would have had a written policy that in any event you would try to get a witness or even a suspect, or whichever way you're looking at that person, into a interview room where you could gain control of the person, have them sit down and tell them that you're going to interview them on camera and audio, and basically conduct an interview. The parking lot caught my attention, Mizzy, and perhaps the feds will have a reason why that interview was conducted in a parking lot, and perhaps it's justified or perhaps it's nefarious. And it just, to me, it stuck out as a glaring concern or issue. Why would you interview somebody about a murder who was the last person to be seen on camera in that person's apartment, and time-wise had the opportunity, et cetera, and perhaps a motive, and you're gonna meet him in a parking lot? I'd be a little suspect of that story.
Yeah. We're coming up on almost an hour, so I'm gonna see if in a second, I'm gonna see if anybody in the chat has any questions for you. But as a sergeant, and let's pretend you were the sergeant on duty that night, and Officer Cotard called you and said, "Hey, I have to do a wellness check for Sandra Birchmore. This is her address." What do you think that you would have done differently from Lank that day?
Well, let me put it this way. If it was me or perhaps another police officer as a supervisor, and we got a call to do a well-being check that somebody was overdue at work, a female, call her a missing person at that point, or, I would probably have sent a supervisor or gone myself to help coordinate the scene. And you mentioned it earlier, should officers have been thinking or doing other things about looking for a car, or, I would have suggested to you, or I did suggest to you, timing is important for a wellness check, because you don't know the degree or circumstances that somebody might be, incapacitated or injured in a apartment. So I'm not going to criticize Lank. I don't know what his work schedule was. I don't know what was going on. I would suggest that he sent some detectives and he had perhaps in his mind some capable individuals, subordinates that he could trust and knew at least they could get to the point where either he or the state police needed to be called. I was always the type of person that felt the supervisor was there to help the patrol force and guide them sometimes with issues that they may not be clear on or may have experience in. And I'm not saying that me or Lank or anybody could have gone in there and said, this isn't a suicide, this is a homicide. I'm just suggesting that a supervisor on scene for that type of wellness check might not have been a bad idea. But again, maybe he couldn't get there. He was monitoring it. He was perhaps directing and controlling it on radio and dispatch or cell phones. Sent the fire department, etc. Contacted Detective John McCourt, and they, I think, arrived together. Again, there was no timeline on that, but usually a supervisor of some sort will also assist the subordinates for the obvious reason. Not that they can't get it right, but to help them and coordinate things and move it along faster. So would I have gone? I probably would have gone.
Okay. Going back to them calling it a suicide, it almost felt like the Canton PD were the first ones to call it that. And then the Massachusetts State Police agreed with that. We don't know. We weren't there, so we don't know if MSP came in and said, oh, yeah, that's a suicide, and like we're pushing it on them. But like you said earlier, I also got the same tip that you got, and you and I actually spoke about it at Canton PD, that first standout I met you, about that there were some officers on the scene who didn't agree with Massachusetts State Police, is what they were saying. And we got them from different sources. And if first, is it normal for you guys to walk into a scene and then Massachusetts State Police just totally disregard what you're saying? Or is it something where, they're the ones who call in and handle, murders and unattended deaths. So what they say goes.
That's a real good question. And it's kind of difficult to give it a one-word answer or a one-line answer, but I would say that police officers responding to the Sandra Birchmore crime scene, finding her the way that we know that was described, she was seated. I believe one of her knees was bent. There was a phone within, I think, 12 inches, and all the particular details. There was some sort of a somewhat controversial description of the ligature that was, we know at least 4 different descriptions of it, tied to a door. I can understand how local officers going in there would look at that and say, this is a suicide. It would be a stretch to think going in, as the Canton officers did, oh, there's a suspect here, somebody staged this, somebody, you know what I mean? There's a lot, you walk in, there's lividity, there's 4 days worth of decomposition. It was probably not a very pleasant scene to be in. And I can imagine why officers, on scene, arriving first on scene, would say, it appears we have a suicide here. And as again, we said, if the chairs weren't overturned, or it didn't look like there was a struggle, or there wasn't blood splatter on a wall, clothes weren't ripped, you know what I mean? You'd start to go along with the concept of what you saw, and in your training and experience, you probably never saw a crime scene where a female was, now that we're learning, apparently murdered by a well-skilled police officer who knew how to stage the scene. So is it totally, unreasonable to think that the Canton police should have known that was a homicide? I'll give them the benefit of the doubt that I can see why initially they thought it was a suicide. But then the necklace and then, the tattooing, the broken bone in the neck, Smock's lengthy, reevaluation for the federal BI versus the state medical examiner. He just went into a litany of reasons why he believed it was a homicide. But for the initial officers responding, Mizzy, I'll give them a pass that initially what they saw, they believed was a suicide.
From the Karen Reed trial, we learned that Massachusetts State Police, when Proctor, through his text, they were talking about, I think it was DeChico and Proctor were texting, and DeChico was like hazing him about not being able to get, Officer John O'Keefe's death labeled as a murder. So that makes you wonder if they have a habit of putting pressure on medical examiners, and that Scorty Bello was just somebody who wasn't breakable, and Capo Martinez possibly could have been somebody who took whatever the Massachusetts State Police were telling her. But for her to miss a hyoid bone, which is, so people know, it's a small bone that is kind of around your thyroid, and it usually gets broken when you are in a strangulation situation. It doesn't break in most hangings. What do you think about that? Do you think, that's a huge possibility that, from those text messages, they were talking about putting pressure on medical examiners?
I agree. And I think the medical examiner issue on both cases, it even just en route, there's concerns there, Mizzy, and you are valid in your assessment that, is there something else going on with these MEs? Are they just there for 8 hours listening to the state police that come in and tell them it was a car accident at 34 Fairview, or that, Sandra Birchmore took her own life? I mean, and they go with that. I guess I'm hoping that the investigation by the FBI and the Department of Justice will do a deep dive on all these questions you and I have right now about the medical examiners.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. There is some concern in my part that they weren't objective.
How much do you think, because these are the concerns I have with the FBI and DOJ's case, that the Massachusetts medical examiner is going to be an issue, and the Massachusetts State Police, the Canton Police possibly, and Michael Morrissey, that's all going to be a part of, that's going to go in favor for Matthew Farwell. And yes, we're going to have Dr. Smock in there, but they have all these officers and the initial exam of her. To me, it's going to be an uphill battle for that part of the case. And you think of it, they're going to call Fanning and Dunn, and they're going to have to explain what went wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's a lot of there that has to be uncovered and revisited and looked at. And, I've read the same reports you have, Mizzy, and, you've got Farwell saying he doesn't want a key, and then suddenly, very close to the murder date, he wants a key. And then there's reports that he, or actually comments by Sandra to friends where he spent quite a bit of time, which was, as she described it, weird, looking in the bathroom, looking around, looking in her closet. It looked to me, and perhaps to a jury, that they're going to say this guy was looking for an opportunity. He had the motive, looking for an opportunity to plan ultimately the dastardly deed he did.
Yeah. I hope that the jury sees it that way. That's the one part of Sandra's case I worry about is the state's theory on the case, because that is an issue, and I hope that doesn't affect him getting, found guilty. I'm hoping. I mean, it would be nice. I go back and forth. It would be nice if he just was negotiating a deal so he could get out of the death penalty, and they can just move it forward that way. But I think only a trial will bring out some of the questions, some of the answers that we all have questions to.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that what you brought up a point a few minutes ago, that the history of the professionalism and the detail and accountability coming out of Morrissey's office by state police investigators is very suspect. And thank God the feds have come into this case in a big way, locked up Matt in Revere, took him down with quite a lot of pomp and circumstance that day in the parking lot when he was dragged out of the truck. And do I think there's a lot more coming on that case by the feds? I certainly do. And again, we don't know what the feds were investigating before the Birchmore case and before the FKR, John O'Keefe's. Were they involved with Senator Brian Joyce going way back on the racketeering? I know for a fact that feds were involved in that case. And we have pictures, I have pictures on my phone of them dealing with the Canton police at Joyce's office in Canton. And as you said earlier, there seems to be the same web of players, police officers, civilians, that just their names seem to come up in all of these queries and deep dives and Facebooks, and we'll see what happens. But I'm not going to give up the fact that I believe that the feds have this and have had it for a long time, and we just have to be patient. And when they come in, I think they're going to come in hot, and they're going to take a lot of people out with them on both cases.
What do you think of, let's put aside, I never want to put aside her murder, but put aside that portion of her case. And you have these officers who were basically committing larceny because they were saying they were working, but they weren't. They were meeting with her on duty, and the state hasn't even charged them with that. And that's an easy case for the state to make. And that was actually moved to out of Morrissey's office. That was moved to the AG's office, and that's all paper. That's paper trail. They have her text messages and they have the information from her stuff, and then they have them saying, yeah, let's meet up here, and then they haven't even charged that yet. I mean, to me, that's small potatoes. But as I said at the standout on Thursday, at least if they charge them with that, it's something. It's something to get these men off the streets, and that gives the FBI more time to do their investigation. Because I personally believe that Sandra was trafficked. Especially what William Farrell was up to. I believe she was trafficked. So what are your thoughts on that? Like, what are your thoughts that nobody else has been charged in anything else when it comes to Sandra's case?
Just again, I think it exemplifies the credibility of District Attorney Mike Morrissey's office and the people that were working out of there. I mean, let's face it, how many of them are no longer involved in the investigative side of the district attorney's office for whatever reason? There's been a state trooper fired. It just, to me, it's it's indicative that there's a real problem and has been a problem there for some time now. Even they're going into the Walsh case and saying that there was a lot of, how would I say it, inappropriate or lack of probable cause and affidavits and warrants. I mean, look at how long we had to wait for discovery on the FKR. I mean, honestly, in one sentence, I don't expect anything credible coming out of Morrissey's office.
Yeah. As a good man and a good police officer, we know that from the audit that a lot of the Canton police rank and file feel like they're disillusioned and that they're upset and about how the community treats them. And I think it's a give and take, but what does that do to a police station? I mean, that ends up, granted the fish rots from the head, Rafferty's gone. They have a new guy who's in there, I believe temporary until they find another, somebody to fully take on the, to be a chief, Lieutenant Gallagher's gone, thankfully. But it's still there. The stench is still there. They got to keep clean, leaving those windows open so it can get out. What does it do to the morale of a police officer when you find out one of your fellow police officers needed? I mean, he might have been an officer in the next town, but it also carried over into Canton because that's where she was murdered. What does that do for morale? And what does that do for somebody like you who just wanted to protect and serve? You wanted to do good for your community, and you just wanted to do your job correctly. What does that do to a police officer?
Well, I would submit that both Stoughton police officers and Canton police officers, as well as anyone that's ever worn a uniform and a badge and a gun, carried a gun across Massachusetts and across this country. And as you know, these cases have gone international. The good ones, the honest ones, the diligent ones, if they're anything like me, they're appalled, they're embarrassed, they're humiliated. As I've said many times, I did not kiss my kids goodnight or goodbye every start of the shift, not knowing if I'd come home again. To have everybody's reputation tarnished in the manner that we have been tarnished through Proctor and the rest of the brigade of bad cops. And Dave Yannetti said it well. He said, there's nothing a good cop hates more than a bad cop. And I trust there's a lot of good cops in Stoughton. There's a lot of good cops in Canton, especially younger ones that haven't bought into this turmoil, but they are afraid to speak out, and they can't speak out, Mizzy, because their careers would basically be over the day they open their mouth. And we've done standout after standout, Friday after Friday, Sunday after Sunday. And I will be honest, there are a number of cruises that go by and the cops give us the thumbs up. Like they believe in what we're doing. Like just truth and justice for John O'Keefe is a sign that we've been carrying since Karen Reed was exonerated. And there are cruises going by giving us the thumbs up discreetly. And, obviously, I'm not telling you cruiser numbers or the officers that are doing it, but I think that's more of the norm in the police department. I think the new interim acting chief that's in there right now, I did a little back dive on him. I've heard many good things about him during his career as a chief down in Middleborough. And I believe that even though he's only there short term, that he's making it clear to the officers and the rank and file, there's a new sheriff in town, and business as usual at Canton PD ain't gonna happen.
Yeah. Funny enough, one of the first people to contact me and congratulate me was a Stoughton police officer. Like one of the first people. And that, I fostered a pretty good relationship with this officer. And I just thought that was, said congratulations, I thought that was pretty cool,
Yeah, I agree.
So are there any questions in the chat before we start to do our closing? Well, Sandra was in the program long before her mom and grandmother passed away. Just to answer, sorry, just to answer this question. The question is, whoops, why is it not? Okay. Not to sound like an a-hole, but I wonder if they figured her mom and grandma passed so no one would care, cause a stink. Thank God for Barb and Mizzy. Yeah, I mean, her family, were putting up a stink. Cousins, like the reason why the Boston Globe broke the story is because one of her cousins went to the Boston Globe and got that first story out and kept fostering a relationship with the Boston Globe. And the Boston Globe was the only one who had kept covering Sandra's case over the years. And yeah, some of it, they probably thought, nobody would, like you said, put up a stink. So, but it wasn't just us. I do want to give shout outs to the people, the Boston Globe, especially Laura Grimaldi. She has been on this case since 2022. And then, granted, it's the station that it came from. The Stoughton report, I got to give McNamara credit that the day they found Sandra, she ordered an investigation into what was going on. And they uncovered a lot in that investigation. And then, the Case podcast, they did such a wonderful job doing a deep dive on Sandra's case and also talking about the Explorers program and other cases of children being hurt by police officers who ran the program. And then you had her family filing the civil lawsuit. And then that's when Barb and I look at it, it was just a baton being passed off in the relay race. And Barb and I, kept it going, and we've ramped it up. And that's why we're here today, where, we were able to get Sandra's case out there. But I agree. I do agree with you on part of that, Teresa, that's part of why they thought they could victimize Sandra, because they thought nobody cared. They didn't understand that strangers would care and, give Sandra respect and take on a cause that had nothing to do with them. And that's why it matters so much that we have somebody like Peter in our ranks, because he can, I've called Peter, I've texted him, hey, I freaked out about one of a report that I had, and I'm not going to get into that report, but there was one time I was like, Peter, I need you to talk me down. And he's like, send me the report. And then he was able to give me that perspective, a firm, police officer's perspective. And it helped talk me come down from me being like so angry about this report. And, people like Peter who are willing to step forward. It means so much, Peter. Like I said at the beginning when I was introducing you, your wealth of knowledge is valuable, but your care for everybody around you has been so valuable. And like I said, you've helped so many people, with side issues, like when the Massachusetts State Police tried to intimidate myself, Annie, and I always say her last name. She's gonna laugh. I always say her last name in my head. It makes me forget her. Nancy. I'm sorry, guys. Her last name is always what pops in my head first, and it like makes my brain go blank. Nancy, when they Massachusetts State Police, trooper tried to back into us, and you helped us with that. And I know you've helped other people. I've sent people to you to get advice, and having you part of FKR and having you part of the Justice for Sandra Birchmore group, it means so much to all of us. And I know I could speak for everybody in the chat who you have helped, and I appreciate you for that.
Well, Mizzy, thank you for that. Certainly, I appreciate that vote of confidence. And, I can pretty much say to you, I think I have attended, as you probably well know, most of your standout vigils, be it in Stoughton or elsewhere. The candlelight vigil in front of the Stoughton Police Department. I've communicated with the deputy chief. I actually went in and spoke with the sergeant when we all filed reports on that incident you're referring to at Stoughton District Court, with that cruiser, twice intimidating you guys in your vehicle. Again, it's the right thing to do, and people have said to me, why did you get involved in this case? Why have you spent the last 3 years of your life totally involved in this case? And my answer is, do you know what? I covered a lot of cases, some murders, motor vehicle homicides of people's best friends. But I can honestly say I've never, ever been more involved in these two cases than any of the other cases that I did when I was on the job. And you just don't lose that fire in the belly to protect people and get it done.
What price do you feel you've paid by doing that?
Well, it was difficult at first. Family members were not talking to me because they felt I was putting them at risk. There was, malicious damage and threats being perpetrated by certain members of certain families. There was total, pretty much isolation from police officers that I spent 30 years with that pretty much said to me, what are you, crazy? What are you doing this? What's your interest in this case? Don't send me any more stuff from Turtle Boy, or don't send me any more stuff. And those officers haven't talked to me, and we used to spend holidays together at their house with our kids and go to sporting events. So it's taken a huge toll, but you know what? Doing the right thing to me is critical. And if they don't see it that way, then maybe they're not doing the right thing.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I appreciate you, and I know everybody in the chat appreciates you. Were there any questions that anybody had? Nobody's popped up any questions, but I want to ask that one more time before we close. Any questions? Does anybody have any for Peter? I'm not seeing any popping up.
Okay. I guess we did a good job getting information out there, and
was there anything?
We can do this again.
Yeah.
There'll be more arrests, Mizzy.
I hope so.
I
hope so.
Yes, you know that.
Is there anything that we didn't touch upon that you want to make sure we mention?
I guess from a standpoint of the town of Canton, I guess until there are arrests made and people see that not only was Karen Reed exonerated, but we have a death of a police officer to deal with. Canton is a fractured community right now, and you asked me how it's affected me and friendships, and I know there's family members in Canton that don't speak with each other, and sons and daughters don't talk to their parents because their parents have taken a certain stand, etc. Until the feds come in and DOJ and put some people in jail and more people on the Birchmore case, perhaps expose Morrissey's office, the healing that Canton needs so badly isn't going to happen.
Yeah, I agree with that. I fully agree with that. We have people thanking you in the chat.
Okay.
You know,
They know how to get a hold of me.
Well, I appreciate you coming on. Last time we tried to do this, it went horribly wrong.
Yes.
My internet has been upgraded, so hopefully I won't lose my internet ever again. Hopefully.
All right.
I appreciate you so much, Peter. You know, like I said, you've been such an amazing friend, and your friendship means so much to me. And I thank you so much for coming on A Mixed Girl in a Mixed Up World.
Well, Mizzy, I can't thank you, and I know the people out there in the audience have to appreciate everything you have done and your commitment. You know, you travel by bus and train to get to these standouts in all kinds of weather. Spend hours on the road getting from point A to point B, and you're just incredibly committed to this. And I want to thank you because without people like you, we need more people like you, Mizzy. And
Thank you.
please stay well. And you know you can reach out to me.
Yes. All right, guys, we're going to wrap this up. I want to thank everybody in the chat and who came to watch us. And I want to thank everybody who is part of the replay crew. Please, before you guys fully head out, can you please pop out? And if you're not subscribed, subscribe. And if you're can please like this video so it can get out to more people. You know, I am a smaller creator, and we want to make sure Sandra's case gets out there as far as it can. And, you know, people need to hear what a police officer who was on, you know, a sergeant at Canton PD had to say about Sandra's case. Thank you, everybody, again for being here. I love you all. And I am Mizzy, and I'm a mixed girl in a mixed up world. Thanks again, Peter.
Okay, thank you. Stay well, everybody.